Today we are finally in the last section of our foldable, which is titled Factoring. We are going to look at several different types of factoring, and this is actually going to be a 2-day section. So today we're going to look at 2 different types of factoring, and we're going to have 3 examples for you to work on. The first type is called greatest common factor. This method will work on any number of terms. And one thing that you need to know about factoring is it's the opposite of multiplying something through, like distributing, or it's the opposite of foiling. So some people call factoring undistributing or unfoiling. And with this method, we're going to basically be ending up with our answer, what would have been our problems a couple days ago. So when you look at factoring, this has 3 terms, and greatest common factor method, you need to check that no matter how many terms. So whenever you start a problem, look and see if there's anything that you can pull out of all of the parts. So looking at the numbers 6, 2, and 6, they all have a factor of 2. So I'm going to pull out the 2. Looking at my letters, this is x squared, x, and x cubed. Those all have a factor of x. And that's the highest exponent that I have on all 3 parts. Looking at the next one, I have y squared, and y. So the highest exponent that is in all 3 parts is just y. This is the greatest common factor of all the parts. So the GCF. We can't just leave that as our answer, so I have to include everything that's left over. So when I take this 6, divide it by 2, it leaves me with 3. X squared divided by x is x. And y squared divided by y is y. Minus, my 2 is already out front, same thing with the x, so all I have in the middle is y. And then I have plus 6. When I pull out the 2 in front, it leaves me with 3. X is cubed. I pull out one of those x's, so it leaves me x squared, and the y is out front. So this entire thing, 2xy times 3xy minus y plus 3x squared is my answer. If you want to check to make sure that you've done it right, you would take 2xy, distribute it, and that would give you your answer of what you started with. So now we're going to look at a second method of factoring. Let's say that we've pulled out a greatest common factor, and now we are left with something that looks like this, where we have either 4 terms or 6 terms. This method is called factor by grouping. So just as before, I need to look and see if there's anything that all 4 parts have in common. This only has a cubed, so the most likely thing, if they have anything in common, has to be an A, but the 12 does not have an A. So what you're going to do in the factor by grouping is split what you have up into 2 parts. So we're going to take this first 2, put them together, and we're going to take the last 2 and put them together. For this method to work, this needs to be addition in between them. So I'm going to change my subtraction into plus a negative and move that minus sign inside those parentheses. Now I have 2 smaller parts, and I'm going to do the same thing as before, where I pull out their largest common factor. This is a cubed minus 4a squared. Both parts have a squared. So I'm going to pull that out to the front, and I write down my leftovers. which is a minus 4. Plus, I go to the second set. Negative 3a plus 12. Well, those both have a factor of 3. Then I write what I'm left over with, and that's negative a plus 4. From here, if you've done this correctly, what you have in the parentheses will match up. Now, if I look here, I have a minus 4. And the second set, I have negative a plus 4. Those are close, but they're not exactly the same. If this a turned positive and this 4 turned negative, it would work. And I can do that if I pull a negative 1 out of both of these, which will then turn this 3 to be a negative. Pulling out that negative, it turns a to be positive and the 4 to be negative. So basically, I have factored out a negative 1, which changes both of these signs. Now what I have underlined in blue matches up. They both say a minus 4. So down here in parentheses, I'm only going to write it once. A minus 4. That comes from both sets of parentheses because they are the same. Now I need to look at what I pulled out in front. So I have a squared, and I have this minus 3. My next set of parentheses is going to come from those. So a squared minus 3. One thing to remember when we started, this was plus. Down here, we pulled out a plus and then we turned it to minus. But when I write my final answer, this is going to be multiplication. And you don't have to write that. You just can't put a plus sign in between there. So what we have essentially done on this problem is we have unfoiled it. We've taken and pulled out the a minus 4 multiplied by a squared minus 3. Easiest way to check and make sure that you've done this right, FOIL this out, which is first, outer, inner, and last, and make sure that you end up with what you started with. The same method can be applied if you have 6 terms. You're going to take your first 3, put those in parentheses. You're going to take the last 3 and put those in parentheses. Now once again, we need to make sure that this is plus, and it already is, so we don't have to worry about moving negative signs or doing anything like that. And I should have checked before to make sure that there wasn't anything that the whole problem had in common. So if I look at 4, my only factors are 2, but I can't divide this 3 by 2. If everything has an x, I can pull an x out. But right here, this term is missing an x. If everything has a y, I could pull a y out of all 6 parts, but this does not have a y. So I do not have a greatest common factor that I can pull out of everything. So now let's go back and look at how I've split them up. This set of 3, all of these do have a factor of 2. They all have a factor of x. And that's all that I can pull out of that set. So now I'm going to do the same thing as above. Now that I've pulled out my 2x, it leaves me with 2y minus 4x plus 3yz. Now I go to my second set. This is plus. The only thing that all 3 parts have in common is a y and a z. So I'm going to pull that out of all 3 parts. In the first part, it leaves me with 2y. In the second part, it leaves me with 4x. And in the third part, it leaves me with 3yz. Now, we're going to compare the two things that we have in parentheses. 2y minus 4x plus 3yz. 2y minus 4x plus 3yz. Those two are the same, so I'm going to write that set of parentheses down. 2y minus 4x plus 3yz. And again, I only write it one time, and that takes both of these into account. Then I write my leftovers. Or sorry, I write down my greatest common factors. 2x plus yz. What I have down here in the red and the green is going to be my answer. And again, if you want to check, take and multiply this back out. If I take 2x times my 2y, I get 4xy. If I take negative 4x times my 2x, I get negative 8x squared. 3yz times the 2x, I get the 6xyz. To get 2y squared z, that's your 2y times the yz. Negative 4x times yz is this middle part right here. And 3yz times yz is your 3yz y squared z squared. Again, you don't want to FOIL it or multiply it back out because this part right here is my answer. So hopefully this helps on factoring. We will be in this section again. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in class.